was July 23rd, 2019. So kind of interesting there. It was a broadcast that was requested, and by the attendance that we're seeing, I can see that even for those of you who've been around the block with this kind of work, it's still something that's relevant, something we need to practice. I was thinking about this story from a client of mine, and it doesn't quite relate to this subject, but it relates to this process. Um, he was describing this idea between having a wound and his wound having him. And what he articulated to me is he said it's a very different experience, for example, to say something like, I don't feel worthy, I don't feel loved, versus saying that there's something in my wounding in my past, there's something in my mind and some thought process that gets triggered that says I don't have any worth, or I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy. And he described the first one as is the wound having you, and the second one as you having the wound. And the reason I'm bringing up this anecdote, not only I think it was a kind of a wise thing for him to articulate, but I think this is one of those things where we're going to struggle with these principles. Tonight's broadcast is about healthy detachment and letting go of outcomes. These are going to be lifelong themes for much of us. And while we can make some significant progress along the way, I think it's important to be kind to ourselves also. We make this work our practice. It becomes a kind of discipline for us to work at it, but it's not something that we ever arrive at. It's not something that we necessarily accomplish. Like I said, we can make great progress, but it becomes part of our discipline and part of our practice. So that was my thought coming into this. I'm going to talk about detachment this evening. I'm going to talk about the second half. It's going to be about letting go of outcomes. And they really, of course, relate to each other very well. I think the most interesting idea that I've discovered with attachment is that it is synonymous with attachment. Not in all people's definitions, but when you talk about psychology, when you talk about addiction, when you talk about codependency, when you're talking about relationships, healthy detachment is the exact same thing as healthy attachment. Healthy detachment is really healthy attachment. We call it detachment because that is what it feels like to those of us who were shown that intimacy is synonymous with anxious attachment, dependency, and enmeshment. Intimacy, healthy attachment, and healthy detachment will feel to most like not caring, abandonment, and too much distance. Probably at the outset, the most important thing to say to you, to prepare you for, if you haven't already experienced this, maybe even if you have, to kind of remind you of this, is that when you start setting healthier boundaries, clearer boundaries between yourselves and the people that you care about, the people that you love, your children specifically, you will feel and you'll be accused of abandonment. It'll feel like abandonment. It'll feel wrong, and you'll be accused of not caring, of abandonment. It really is the experience. When we depart even just a little, or when we betray the ideas of our family of origin, of our mother tongue, it's going to feel wrong to us. I talk about this all the time in therapy when people are presenting to me their dilemmas, their symptoms, and they ask me the question, how can I stop doing this? The blunt response, if I'm to give it, is you've got to be willing to tolerate something that feels absolutely wrong, that feels horrible to you. You've got to be willing to feel shame, perhaps, but at least a great deal of guilt. I tell you all of this because this is that preparation for what's ahead when you set a healthy boundary. And by the way, you're going to do it messy. You're not going to get it perfect. You're going to at times um, overcompensate, maybe be a little bit too self-centered. That's okay. It's part of being human. You're doing that already. You're making mistakes already. But to be too sensitive to those accusations or to those thoughts that come into our head would likely put us right back where we started, which is we can't take care of ourselves. It's not okay to take care of ourselves. It's not okay to say no. So that prepare for that homeostatic, that's the clinical term, the homeostatic resistance in our system, meaning pushing us back to the status quo. If we prepare for that, we're more capable often of kind of fighting our way through it. Melanie Beatty, who could kind of be thought of as the voice of codependency. I'll say this again for those of you who've heard any number of my broadcasts. You'll know that I talk about this idea that codependency is a lay term. It's a pop psychology term. And really what we would be talking about in more clinical terms is probably attachment. In family systems terms or in relationship theory, we'd be talking about enmeshment or cutoff. And I'll talk more about those specific terms later. But this idea, you can think of codependency as somewhere on the continuum of unhealthy relationships. I think it's important, like a lot of mental health ideas, that we not create a binary, that we not think of it like there are codependents and non-codependents, but rather that there are two perhaps theoretical extremes of healthy relationships versus codependent relationships, and all of us are somewhere along that continuum in between. I think that's the healthiest, most balanced, humble way that we can think about it. Melanie Beatty said, codependents are reactionaries. They overreact, they underreact, but rarely do they act. They react to the problems, pains, lives, and behaviors of others. They react to their own problems, pains, and behaviors. This is important. I think the reason why concepts like healthy detachment and codependency are so difficult to grasp is because we come into it with a flawed idea about the whole continuum. On one hand, and Melanie Beatty is describing this really well, on one hand, there is over and under reacting. While stylistically and even behaviorally, those might look very different, they are fundamentally a lack of connection, a lack of intimacy, a lack of attachment, a lack of self. So that's why sometimes behaviorally, there's other reasons that I'll talk about this evening. Sometimes behaviorally, we're not able to identify codependent behaviors on their surface. Codependency is an inside thing. It's not what you do, it's why you do it. It's the difference between expressing yourself and letting go of the outcome, which of course is part of tonight's broadcast, versus trying to manage or control outcomes or how somebody thinks and feels. On paper, if we were to look at a transcript, the behavior might be identical. And again, that's another reason why I think it can be so difficult for people to grasp, is because it's a very nuanced internal process. Detachment doesn't mean, these are some quotes that I wanted to share. Detachment doesn't mean I'm trying less hard. It just means that fears and emotions that used to torment and paralyze me no longer have the same power over me. Even this writer's suggestion, the fact that they're warning against the idea that it's not that I'm trying less hard, it gives you a sense of the battles that we all fight internally when we try to move away from unhealthy attachment or unhealthy detachment. When we try to walk away from relationships that are fused, that are reactive. Detachment is not detaching from the person that we care about, but rather from the agony of the involvement in the drama. It's getting on the roller coaster with our loved one with a disease or a mental illness. It really is getting on the roller coaster with anybody. Because like I've said many times, you don't have to have somebody in your life that qualifies as an addict or an alcoholic or somebody with a mental illness. You don't have to have that to be demonstrating codependency or a lack of awareness around detachment. I say it all the time. I have my codependency, my qualifier could be the mail carrier. I don't need to have addicts and alcoholics and mentally ill people in my life. That's just part of my wiring. It's what I learned from my family of origin. Like I've made clear already, healthy detachment is healthy connection. I remember I was co-presenting or co-hosting a parent weekend at a program a couple of years ago with a Buddhist monk, and we were supposed to complement each other. He was going to do a lot of the mindfulness training, and I was going to do a lot of the parent skills training. And of course, in Buddhism, one is encouraged to practice detachment and to let go of attachments. And I kept trying to explain to him and to others in psychological terms, we don't think of attachment as a negative thing. If you have a secure attachment, if you provide a secure attachment with a child, that's not a negative thing. You have capacity in that example to let the child struggle, to not become too attached to their pain, their difficulties, to not rescue. Really, you're talking about a lack of anxiety in the relationship. It was difficult to get that point across because there was a little bit of a language barrier, and because we were coming from different disciplines, if you will, it was hard for them to see the parallels. In Al-Anon, there's a slogan that says, "Your serenity is your responsibility." And the fact of the matter is, that's a fundamental concept that I think that is particularly important for people who have children that are struggling, because it goes back to this idea that we model for our children. Most parents believe and operate from a place that a way to direct or teach a child, even in a they imagine it to be kind of an enlightened way, is to tell the child how you feel. So when you're upset or angry, disappointed, scared, you're signaling to the child that they're doing something wrong. When you're happy or proud or excited, you're signaling to the child that they're doing well. This slogan, "Your serenity is your responsibility," runs completely counter to that. Yes, there's places to share feelings with loved ones, but the reason that I'm so reluctant to endorse that or encourage that for a lot of people is that it's rare that it doesn't seep into the equation that people are wanting people to change to make them feel better. And when you're struggling with addictions or mental health issues, and you're hurting the people that care about you the most, it's just too great of a burden to add on to what you're already struggling with. So taking back responsibility for your serenity is important. Detachment sometimes is necessary in order to restore your sanity, your peace of mind. Sometimes you have to detach to find yourself. It was my letting go that gave me a better hold, somebody said. Right? All of these start to challenge our notion about what it means to be attached, to be connected, to have intimacy, to love somebody. What is detachment? There's a book for interventionists. It's in fact it's an entire model that Jeff and Deborah J talk about. They have a book called Love First, and it is this model for doing interventions where the family members and loved ones of the person who where the intervention is focused are expressing love, compassion, not anxiety and upset, escalated feelings. It's similar to what we talk about in our hopes and intentions letter. It's not an impact letter that says this is how your addiction is impacting me. It's a hopes and intentions letter that says this is our hope for you. This is my hope for you. It's love without control. It's a courageous kind of love. It's a courageous kind of love because the one displaying detachment has done their work. Like my favorite quote about love that I constantly refer back to from Mahatma Gandhi, where he says, a coward is incapable of exhibiting love. It's the prerogative of the brave. Projection, fusion going home is easy. Loving another's otherness is heroic. And if we love other, he says, as other, and this is the key, if we love other as other, we have heroically taken on the responsibility for our own differentiation, our own journey. And this heroism may properly be called love. So, anxious attachment, the euphemism, I talk about this, the euphemism that is used sometimes to soothe people who have an anxious attachment, they're told or taught or come to believe that I just love too much. It's not loving too much. It's really a lack of self, right? It's a lack of self-development, a lack of ability to soothe oneself, to self-regulate. And so we've really got to stare into the darkness to love people. We've got to look at our most terrifying thing, which is to be alone, to be abandoned, to be able to love. We've got to surrender control to love. All of those ideas have in them the characteristic of courage. Detachment is differentiation. Differentiation in psychological terms is the balance between caring for somebody and being connected to them and supporting their individuality. And to the extent that those two things can be simultaneously present in a relationship, there is detachment and differentiation. To the extent that one of those or both are compromised, there is what family systems therapists would call undifferentiation. So differentiation is the ability to be in a relationship with somebody where there is intimacy and also respect for individuality. There's an ability to see yourself and the line and the other person and their needs. I was thinking about this just yesterday with my own parenting, that some of the mistakes that I make and the mistakes that most of us make are connected back to us trying to repair our own childhood wounds. If I wasn't listened to very well, then I'm going to perhaps make the mistake of listening too much. And what that looks like is trying to reason with a child or talk them into it, or being compromised by a child's feelings, upset feelings, so that my boundary is erased or I give it up. So understanding yourself and your child's needs. I remember a simple example, and of course there are much more important examples than this. I remember a father explaining to his son that he loved him and that he wanted to play sports with him, and he supported him playing soccer and various things that he did. And the young man said, "I wasn't a sports guy, Dad. That was you and your father. I was an artist." And the dad was silent because with just a little bit of reflection, he was like, that was mine. That was my wound. That's what I wanted. That's what I didn't get. And that's what I was trying to give to you. Detachment is assertive. That's the biggest misunderstanding, is that it is often thought to be synonymous with passivity. Healthy detachment and letting go of outcomes is not passive. It is assertive. I would argue that without detachment or letting go, that it's impossible to be assertive, that those are necessary ingredients in the quality of being assertive. It's honest. I'll talk about this as we go, but the simplest way to explain Detachment and letting go of the outcome is honesty. All of us can relate to this. When you tell the truth to somebody, you're letting go of control. And why do we lie? We lie to try to control what other people think and feel and how they react. So if we were to incorporate the ideas of detachment, the ideas of letting go, we would be more honest with people. Not necessarily unkind or cruel, but honest. Detachment is not separation and abandonment. It's not caring. Although, like I said, it will feel like it and you will be accused of it by those close to you. It's not disconnection. Of course, it's not dependent. It's not blaming. It's not controlling. It's not failing. It's not passive. And maybe the more nuanced idea here is it is not the solution to your child's problems. Developing healthy detachment and letting go of outcomes, more vaguely put in pop psychology terms, recovering from your codependency, will not fix your child. And I do believe that we in the treatment and therapeutic field are guilty at times of implying that it will. Healing your codependency, practicing detachment, letting go of outcomes will not fix your child. It will only fix you. That fix, mind you, that shift, that change can have a wonderful impact or influence on others. But ultimately, that's up to them. Why detachment? It encourages autonomy and competency. It fosters in the other person a sense of self. Because the pressures or the pulls that's inherent in codependency and unhealthy attachment, the pressures and the pulls are not present when we've detached. And there's kind of a psychological, what I call a gravitational effect on people. If we need people to feel a certain way, to think a certain way, to react a certain way, to believe a certain thing, if we're close to them, if there are children, there will be this kind of gravity that comes into the relationship that will erode and eat away at and pull a person out of who they are. And then they get wired to relate to other people in the same way. When you hear the cliche that you're going to marry your mother or your father, it's not that you're going to marry somebody who is a doctor or a lawyer, somebody with black hair, or somebody that is tall. The real idea is that you're going to marry somebody who essentially has the same level of differentiation, the same expectations about your responsibility for their feelings and vice versa. I'll talk more about that as I go tonight. Detachment requires you to develop a strong sense of self. It requires you to do battle with your anxiety. Conflating anxiousness with love is a fundamental mistake. They are, in some ways, opposite to each other. Anxiety is fear, and fear and love they're kind of opposites. Or at least they live very far away on the continuums of emotions and mental health and thought processes and sensibilities. Like I said, detachment is intimacy. Detachment, while it connects and shares with somebody else, it encourages the development of somebody's sovereign sense of themselves. Think about a person like a country. And with that, you can think about the sovereignty of a self. Detachment supports that. I was just sharing with somebody today. A quote that I've used before, that the great artist Banksy said, parents will do almost anything for their children except for allow them to be themselves. I shared that thought actually with a parent, not because I was critiquing their parenting skills, because I was talking about their own childhood and how they didn't grow up in a home where who they are was the question, where how they felt was the question. They grew up in a home where getting it right, according to the parents, getting the right answer was the equation. So, of course, they're going to grow up believing that with their children. Healthy detachment models self-care. You take care of yourself so that your children don't have to. If there's one thing that if I could wave a magic wand so that people could see something that is invisible to them because of their training or lack of training, it would be to understand how universally parents ask children to take care of them. That's the thing if I could wave a magic wand and get some kind of psychological wish for the world, it would be the awareness of how parents ask children to take care of them and the effects, the side effects that come from that. Stop maintaining the cycle of addiction or other problem behaviors. Detachment, when you practice detachment, there's less rescuing, right? Rescuing people from their feelings, from the consequences. There's less enabling, which is kind of an inadvertent way of kind of supporting somebody's maladaptive behaviors or addiction. You stop over-functioning. You stop distracting from the problem behaviors. And like I said, there's an inadvertent reinforcing of behaviors that we all participate in, that it is really important and valuable for us to look at and understand and see. Why is healthy detachment hard to define? Is because, like I said, we confuse it with passivity or inactivity. We confuse it with indifference or an absence of love. These are the ways that we were guilted and shamed as children when we acted in ways that didn't suit our parents. We fear rejection, separation, loss. We feel guilt or shame for being a bad whatever. Right? If your child accuses you of not loving them, of abandoning them, yeah, we have lots of clients that come to us who are adopted. And so the parents are on hyper alert for abandonment themes or behaviors. And so if your child accuses you of abandoning them, the adoptive parent is going to be paralyzed by that, let alone the birth parent who's raising the children that they gave birth to. So interestingly to understand for me, and the more I talk about this, the more bluntly, or maybe you would accuse me of crudely saying it, is that when we accept being bad, we get a freedom to do the right thing. That it is our fear of being bad, our attempts to try not to be a bad father, mother, wife, husband, friend. It is that fear that contributes to lying, manipulation, toxicity, a lack of courage, dishonesty, inauthenticity, on and on and on. Similar as fear of failure would be that thing. We fear rejection, which could happen. I want to make that clear. You could be rejected by people if you set healthier boundaries, clearer boundaries. We just fear pain, ours and theirs. And then we have few models. I borrowed this from a website. Let me share with you some thoughts. Ability to allow people, places, or things the freedom to be themselves. These are various concepts in healthy detachment. Holding back from the need to rescue, save, or fix another person from being sick, dysfunctional, or irrational. Giving others the space to be themselves. Disengaging from an over enmeshed or dependent relationship with people. a willingness to accept that you cannot change or control another person, place, or thing. That's the problem, is that we're so good at manipulation that it's hard for us to imagine. I haven't asked this rhetorical question in years during these broadcasts, but I used to ask this early on in my career. I would ask parents, and especially when they were present, I would ask them, who's in charge of you getting a raise at work? Assuming you're not self-employed. Who's in charge of you getting a raise at work? You or your boss? And it wasn't always unanimous, but largely people would answer, I'm in charge of getting a raise at work. To which I would ask the follow-up questions. Is it possible for you to be an outstanding employee, the best, and not get a raise? And everybody couldn't argue with the logic and would say, of course. And I said, I followed it up with, is it possible to be a really subpar employee and to still get a raise? Is that possible? And of course, everybody couldn't argue with the logic. So they would say, yes, that's possible. And then I would re-ask the question. So who's in charge of you getting a raise at work? And because people had to follow the logic, they recognized that it was the boss that was in charge of giving the raise at work. You're in charge of being a good employee. And if your boss is a adequate boss, right? If they're good at their job, then they're in charge of rewarding good employees. As long as they're competent at what they do at the job of being a manager, it's their decision to give you a raise or not. Somebody then argued with me one time, well, what if you are self-employed? And I said, it's still the customer's choice whether or not to buy your product, buy your widget. There are products out there. There are products out there that get a lot of money, that aren't that good. There are products out there that don't get a lot of money, that are really good. This is not an abdication of personal responsibility. It's understanding the fine line between what you can and can't control. And obviously, if you produce good work, if you do good work, your chances multiply exponentially in terms of success. But because we're so good at manipulating, that's most of us, we start to believe the illusion that we're in control of people. And then we bring that home. Developing and maintaining of a safe emotional distance from someone whom you have previously given a lot of power to affect your emotional outlook on life. Establishing the emotional boundaries between you and those people you have become overly enmeshed or dependent with, in order that all of you might be able to develop your own sense of autonomy and independence. It's also a process by which you are free to feel your own feelings when you see another person falter and fail, and not be led by guilt to feel responsible for their failure or faltering. Forgive again, like last week, like the other day, my dog in the background. There is this concept, these themes and detachment that really do free us up and provide really our only chance at intimacy. Going on, an ability to maintain an emotional bond of love, concern, and caring without the negative results of rescuing, enabling, fixing, or controlling. Placing all things in life into a healthy, rational perspective, and recognizing that there's a need to back away from uncontrollable and unchangeable realities of life. That word rational is important, because codependency and control is really found in the limbic system, right? The emotional fight or flight, the lower parts of the brain. That's our survival. And our rational, our higher parts of the brain are the way out of this. We learn new wiring through therapy. We learn it, hopefully, by having a different kind of experience with a therapist. That's the goal. If you have an adequate therapist, you start to have a different experience about what it means to be in a caring, supportive relationship. And then that experience challenges the old way of thinking. It competes with the old messages. And we began to, I've talked about this recently, that my 1 hour a week for 21 years with Jamie Gill starts to become this reference point against which I measure all other relationships and interactions. The ability to let people you love and care for accept personal responsibility for their own actions and to practice tough love and not give in when they come to you to bail them out when their actions lead to failure or trouble for them. The ability to allow people to be really who they are, to be who they really are, rather than who you want them to be. The ability to avoid being hurt, abused, taken advantage of by people who in the past have been overly dependent or enmeshed with you. When we let go of our expectations of others and do not try to make them fulfill our wants and needs, we are practicing healthy detachment. When we are able to remain in a place of joy or satisfaction while being in the presence of someone who's in a negative place, think your child, we are practicing healthy detachment. I'm a father of four. I'm not a mother of four. I'm a father of four. But even as a father of four, and I say that because I think there are different cultural expectations for fathers and mothers, different ideas. So as a father of four, I know that there is a connection to my child's pain and suffering. And so these are more fundamental baseline ideas that my life is not in my children's basket. You know, I talk about this, this saying, this idiom that you're only as happy as your least happy child. It's not just something that we say as an acknowledgement of what it means to be a parent, but we actually are encouraged to aspire to that. Think about the implications of that. In other words, we're telling children, if you're unhappy, I'm unhappy. You have to be happy. And as a therapist and a person observing people on this planet, in this society, I cannot tell you the amount of times I hear parents telling their children not to feel. That's essentially gaslighting, folks. Gaslighting could be thought of to be more severe in severe cases, but that's gaslighting. We refrain from offering advice and ways to fix things, but truly listen to someone. We are practicing healthy detachment. When we allow someone to make his or her own decision and follow through with it, even though we believe it will not have a beneficial outcome, we are practicing healthy detachment. I've learned, I talk about this, that there's this practice that I encourage us to consider where we pretend like we don't know somebody else's truth. We don't know what's best for them. We pretend like we don't know what they need to do. And after a while of pretending, we start to believe it. I know this is true for a lot of you. It's true for me. It's true for the kids that we work with. Some of the most important lessons that we learn come from our mistakes. So with that in mind, why would we be so arrogant to believe that we know which mistakes should be avoided for other people? It doesn't make us passive with our boundaries, with our support, with our limits. It doesn't do that. But we do those things from a place of taking care of ourselves, not managing the other person. When we allow someone to make his or her own decision and follow through with it. I already read that one. When we appropriately set a boundary with someone by refusing to engage him or her in an argument, we are practicing healthy detachment. You might notice that in our society, that particular one is being tested in the cultural and political spheres right now. People are unable to stop arguing with each other, even when it is recognized as futile. I found this 6 steps to healthy detachment. Accept reality, step 1. There's very little you can do to change anyone besides yourself, and other people's problems aren't yours to solve. Step 2, give yourself credit. You've done a lot to help. I think that's really important to say to you all. Restore balance. Seek balance and peace in your own life as best you can. I always think about it that some of the times that we're trying to control other people, we're trying to create balance outside of us. Restore balance internally. Let go. Remember that others' behaviors are not a reflection on you. That's a tough one, isn't it? Especially for us parents. And their behaviors are not personal. You can't control what they do, but you can control how much you take or how you'll respond. React less. Notice when your feelings seem to be tied to the other person. Try to figure out why this happens, then practice detachment next time. It's why when I in person am visiting parent meetings, or I'm visiting with parents that have been through our program, or parents that are just doing this work, I hear when their story, their day-to-day serenity, their joy, their meaning is inextricably tied to their child. And to the extent it is tied to our children, it's not helpful for the child either. We might think it's just, like I said earlier, just love. It's not good for us or them. Somebody tells me the story of their struggling child as a context for how they're getting triggered in their struggles and their relapse. Sure. That I celebrate. But when somebody is inextricably connected, their daily joy and serenity and meaningfulness is connected to the child, that can be pretty heavy for the child to carry. Practice self-care. Get in touch with your own needs and wants. Let others take care of you. Accept their compliments and find mutual relationships. In time, she says, you will find that you feel calmer, less angry, less anxious, and better able to respond to your own life. This is gonna be a little bit of a long one tonight, I think. I'm gonna speak a little bit about boundaries. These are two, Salvador Minuchin and Murray Bowen are two of those that are considered to be founders of family therapy. 1970s is when they started their work. And they defined the stuff that happens between people instead of focusing on what's happening inside of a person. It's what happens between people that defines the health of the system. That's more important, more weighty, they thought. So Minuchin did actually describe enmeshment as a loss of autonomy due to a blurring of psychological boundaries. Disengagement was on the other side of the equation, he said. It was a psychological isolation that resulted from being overly rigid in one's boundaries around individuals. Dr. Bowen's words for those were emotional cutoff. Bowen's term for flight from an unresolved emotional attachment, or fusion, a blurring of psychological boundaries between self and others, similar to Minuchin's enmeshment. But here's where I think things get exciting. The similarity between their models is both important, but the difference might be as important or more enlightening for us. Bowen, see, Minuchin thought that on one side of the equation, that disengagement was one thing. On the other side, that enmeshment was the other. And he said those are opposites, because he was paying attention to the way that they looked and felt. He was paying attention to the behaviors. Bowen was looking deeper around the same time. And he said those two styles aren't different at all. In fact, they're an inability to be in an intimate, healthy relationship. So while they might look different, while emotional cutoff, or disengagement might look radically different from fusion or enmeshment, they're essentially the other side of the same coin. And they belong at one end of the continuum. And what he did was he drew this theoretical line with an arrow at one end. And at one end, he put a 0. That was 0 differentiation. These are all theoretical. And at the other end, he put 100. So 0 was undifferentiation, and 100 was differentiation. And that's kind of his idea. Think of it as a continuum. 0 is fusion and enmeshment, disengagement and cutoff. Differentiation is intimacy, clear boundaries, a balance of self and connection to others. So that was Bowen's model. And again, it gets more interesting as I go along. And Bowen said, in families, if the family operates around, let's just say, a 65, he had a term for it that's not important. Let's say the family's number on this theoretical 0 to 100 scale is around a 65. Everybody in the family is going to be sort of near that 65. They might not be right at 65, but let's just say theoretically somewhere between 60 and a 70. He called it a family ego mass. Unimportant, but that's what he called it. Everybody's going to operate between a 60 and a 70. And here's what's fascinating is when you go out into the world, if you're a 65 or you're a 63, and you go out into the world, you don't like to hang around 50s. But maybe more interesting, you also don't like to hang around 75s. That's fascinating. Because we, I think, of course, we would look to somebody higher on the scale and we would admire them, right? They're enlightened. We would aspire to be like them and we would want to be in relationship to them. And the answer is you don't. You don't like them. You don't get along with them. They don't make sense to you. 90s don't make sense to 65s. 40s don't make sense to 65s. This is a question I asked if we were in person. I would ask it and I would wait for answers. What does a 65 think of a 40? What does somebody that's around that 65 theoretical number on a differentiation scale think of somebody who's 25 numbers below them? They think of them as immature, reactive, dependent, right? Unevolved. That's an easy question to answer, I think. But what does a 65 think of a 90? That's an interesting question, I think. What a 65 thinks of as a 90 is 90s don't care. 90s are robotic. 90s are indifferent. 90s use psychobabble and jargon to justify their selfishness. When I was teaching this to a group of parents at one point, for those of you who are watching live, you can see the scale on the screen, of course. When I was teaching this to a group of parents, one of the parents said, let's say that you move up the scale. Let's say you move up to a 90. By the way, you move very, very, very slowly up this theoretical scale. Painstakingly slow. And it takes months and years to move up it. And lots of work. But theoretically, she asked, if you're a 90, don't you owe it to your family members, the people that you're close to, your friends, to explain to them what you're doing because the rules have changed? And part of my answer is, of course, an explanation once or twice to people that care about you, that you care about, would make sense. But it's a slippery slope. What I essentially said is 90s don't explain themselves to people. 40s do a lot because 40s are trying to convince everybody to be like them. 90s are okay if people don't follow. 90s are okay if people don't operate the same way. They are compassionate and loving and caring, but they're also well-boundaried. Earlier I said, that idea of marrying your parents. This is the idea. This is what they're talking about. 65s look for people between 60 and 70. I hate this model in some ways because it shatters the illusion that I have in my head that I'm more advanced than everybody in my family, including my wife. I love living in the illusion that I'm the most enlightened one in my family. And this idea that I know to be true, of course, shatters that shallow kind of arrogance that I like to hold on to cover up my dramatic and pervasive insecurity. What does it look like when we are not detached? We might look angry or have reactive outbursts. We might be passive or pleasing. Again, notice how stylistically different those two descriptions are. We might respond with the silent treatment or game playing or manipulating. We repeat ourselves often in an attempt to try to change, encourage, or manipulate others. Bullying, nagging are common. We're more likely to be depressed and anxious, especially as it relates to other people's behaviors. We blame other people for our feelings. We make others responsible for our serenity, for our peace of mind, for our well being. In essence, we are codependent with others. We are obsessed with trying to control them. Shifting or taking a little bit of a left turn, let's talk about letting go. And we've referred to it already, but letting go is a part of this detachment equation. You're detaching yourself from outcomes. When you tell the truth, like I said earlier, when you set a boundary, when you draw a line in the sand, when you say no, think about all examples of limits and boundaries. You let go of control. It can give you a wonderful sense of peace, calmness, and groundedness, but it can hurt like hell too and be scary as all get out. So we're letting go of fear and control. And we have good reasons to want to control because we don't want to suffer pain, and it's probably happened to us in the past. In other areas in our lives, being a control freak was something that helped us to survive or be successful. I kind of want my medical doctor to be a control freak. I don't want to be married to a control freak, but I wouldn't mind my oncologist being a control freak. Right? So it serves us in some contexts. It serves us in earlier places in our lives. We carry from our traumas and from our woundedness this aversion to revisiting that pain, that original pain. And so we try to protect it, protect ourselves, protect our children from it. It worked for you as a child, or it might have worked for your other children. What's the harm? Right? We have small examples and small circumstances where our controlling behavior paid off. Well, the harm is it doesn't over the long run encourage intimacy, connection, and the sense of self in the other person. What letting go people do, people who are practicing letting go as a part of their life, they tell the truth. They assert their needs clearly. They develop and establish boundaries. They make all of this work a practice. They make knowing themselves the priority. They stay, as it were, on their side of the street. They follow through on commitments, promises, and boundaries they set. They feel deeply, honestly, and courageously. They make core values and goals the things that drive them. They face their dragons, their fears. They're willing to look into the face of those who are accusing them of abandonment and a lack of warmth and love, and compassionately allow that belief to exist. They demonstrate vulnerability and they don't blame others. They take care of themselves. Part of parenting in this way is, I talk about it often, is you take care of yourself with your boundaries. That's what boundaries are for. They're not for controlling other people or teaching other people. They do tend to have that effect, but that's not what they're for primarily. They're for taking care of yourself. And so, if our rule in our house is that the living room, the common areas have to be clean on a daily basis, and there are consequences if it's not the case, if you're not participating, that's me taking care of my need. Some people will tell me, well, isn't that just asking the child to take care of your need? And I explain it's not. It's not asking the child because you're taking care of yourself. In fact, they're annoyed with you. They're, if you allow them to be appropriately, upset and think you're a horrible, neurotic, old-fashioned, anxious parent. So no, they're not taking care of you. They're just being themselves. make their serenity, people that practice letting go, make their serenity their responsibility instead of giving their fear to others. What are the effects? The common effects. A lack of letting go turns children into behaviors. It's one of the most common resets or reframes that we make as therapists in family therapy, is to look beyond, beneath, behind the behaviors. Not letting go turns others, children specifically, into objects that reflect back to us our worth, our qualities as a parent. Not letting go creates power struggles. Differentiation in families where there's not a practice of letting go is lacking. People don't know how to be themselves. They need consensus approval. And they either react by placating and pleasing or react by constantly cycling through relationships because they don't know how to compromise and negotiate and work through difficulties and conflict. In families where there's a lack of letting go, there's intense shame, intimidation, guilt, fear, and other forms used quite effectively, I might add, in the short run, that have not negative long-term effects on the development of the self. You might get compliance. That's one of the biggest not talked about dangers of some of these not letting go behaviors is sometimes you get compliance. I use shame and fear sometimes as a father when I'm triggered or lazy or exhausted. And I sometimes get the behavior that I want, but it comes at a cost. The goal, of course, is to listen to what the behaviors are teaching us in the process. Somebody said to me one time, I've heard this before many times actually, tell me what to do so my child doesn't end up at your program. And my honest, frank answer is I can't. I'm not in the business of doing that. And number one, ending up in our program is not a horrible thing. The people that go through it will often tell me it's one of the greatest gifts, albeit really wrapped in some of the crappiest wrapping paper of all time, but it's one of the greatest gifts that it's ever come to their family. And that having a struggling child can wake you up to things that you would not be awake to. And so you can only control what you can control. You don't get to win. You get to choose how to lose. You get to be and practice self-awareness, self-discovery, authenticity, courage, and then you turn over your child's behaviors to them. And you follow through on your boundaries and consequences, which could include and go up to coming to evoke therapy programs. This is from my first book. Parent education doesn't change children, it changes parents. And that change can have a powerful impact on the family. What you get when you let go is you often get what you wanted in the first place. Not always, but often. You get connection. You find more meaning in your life. You develop a relationship with a higher power, which is a great source for many people of love and trust in the universe, so that fear doesn't have a hold over you, or you learn to practice radical acceptance. Those two ideas, faith and radical acceptance, are very connected to each other, very synonymous. You have less fear, anxiety, anger, and depression in your life. The outcome of good parenting is not well-behaved children, but rather peace, serenity, confidence, clarity, and the possibility of connection. I'll read that again. This is from The Journey of the Heroic Parent. The outcome of good parenting is not well-behaved children, but rather peace for the parent, serenity, confidence, clarity, and the possibility of connection. I wrote this quite commonly at the end of a presentation on communication and consequences. A parent in the audience will say to me, but I think I've done all of this. I'm not perfect, but I have done all of this, and none of it worked. So let's explore this question. I respond. What if you do everything right and it still doesn't work? It's critical to remember that it's not about you. Healthy parenting is its own reward. Healthy parenting is its own reward. It creates a better life for you and for your family. As I've said, being a healthy parent means being a better mother, father, brother, sister, and friend, a better person. This is the goal of healthy parenting, to be the best parenting human being that you can be. But the measure of that is your own personal serenity, even when your child continues to struggle. Even the very question, I did all of this and it didn't work, it speaks to the idea that's embedded in the problem of codependency and the problem of a lack of attachment and the problem of not letting go. It reduces everything to a behavioral transactional exchange of cause and effect. What are the take homes? Become educated and develop a practice of healthy detachment. There's no way to get through this work. There's no way to improve in the areas that we talk about without facing and doing battle with guilt and coming to terms with the idea that guilt does not indicate that you're doing something wrong. We have to remove and separate those two things. Guilt is a debilitating influence on our lives. We have to find a deeper, richer source for morality than guilt, because guilt is a liar. It's unreliable. At best, it's unreliable. At worst, it just simply lies. Explore your wounds and your history. Learn what it means to be in a relationship with the other. I talk about that in the journey of the heroic parent, but the audacity to be you, that's the essence. It's not just children, but what does it mean to be in a relationship with another? That was one of the titles I came up with before I titled it The Audacity to Be You. It was loving yourself and loving other. Fear is the enemy. It can inform you, but if it's driving the ship, if it's in the driver's seat of the bus, it's a problem. Get support from therapists, from sponsors, from groups, from experienced parents, and take care of yourself there so others don't have to, specifically your children. Al-Anon, CODA, or Families Anonymous can help. Therapy can help. Turn the outcome over to the other person. I said this the other night. You dent your children. You can't get away with not denting children. You are human. You try to be accountable. You try to apologize. You try to model courage and vulnerability. But ultimately, you turn it over to them. Or maybe to your higher power, if that helps you. You practice the beginner's mind, the not knowing. It's really important to not have all the answers. Really important. And develop a practice of radical acceptance. That is embracing your place, your journey, and the treasures you have to offer. If we keep repeating to ourselves that we shouldn't be here, or this shouldn't be happening, or it's unfair, if we get stuck in that place, we miss the treasures that this journey has to offer. Radical acceptance opens us up to the goal that this journey has to offer. I don't have time for a lot of questions because I've gone over, so I'll go over the upcoming events, and then looks like I have a question or two that I can address before we close. If there are any questions left over, I'll use them for an upcoming broadcast on open forum on Q&A. If you want to do a deep dive, we have intensives online. We have fantastic intensive staff. We have a new clinical director of our intensives program. The Evoke model of doing deep, powerful, immersive work. It's scary when you think about it. Maybe the word intensives is not the best word, but almost inevitably, almost everybody says, I wish I'd done this earlier. And there are many of you sitting on this broadcast right now that would talk about and share the anxiety that you had leading up to, even considering quitting or coming up with an excuse, and afterwards it being a profound experience. So email intensives@evoketherapy.com. You'll likely end up talking to Emma Reedy, my daughter, who works for me, and she's a fantastic teacher. You might talk to Travis Slagle, our clinical director, or Sarah Carroll, our program director. Finding you too online, finding you in person. We're practicing some of those. with some testing and some specific health protections. So you can ask our admissions or our program staff about that. We have pursuits trips that are customized if you want. Think about family or young person sober fun or therapy light adventure trips that go from 3 to 30 days. Can be really powerful. We have online parent support groups for alumni. So if you are an alumni of our wilderness therapy program, the next one will be August 6th. Dr. Matt Hoig, my partner, will be hosting it August 6th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And if you are an alumni of the intensive program, the next parent support group will be hosted by Travis Slagle, August 11th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Email malia@evoketherapy.com for more information or to register. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups while they're with us. Just ask you to go to six to try them on. Any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, adult children. We've included Refuge Recovery as a Buddhist-inspired alternative to the 12-step program, and also NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is a fantastic resource that has local chapters in all major metropolitan areas. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or on soundcloud.com. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram using the handle Evoke Therapy, @Evoke Therapy. You can also find the intensives on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find Evoke Therapy programs, and we have a brand new page, Evoke Therapy Intensives Facebook page. So search us there. Malia, will you tell me the exact name of the Facebook page for the intensives so I can read that correctly? We ask you to join, to comment, to like, to follow. You can find the Evoke Family Foundation on Facebook also, and our Evoke Therapy blog, of course, has great content each week. My books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon. The first book is available also. There's an audiobook coming soon, the audiobook for The Audacity to Be You. I'm just doing the final editing of that audio that I recorded myself, and so did my therapist. She wrote the prologue and she recorded it in her own voice. So, one or two questions. My son is going to aftercare and is angry that he can't come home. The both of us are not ready for him to come home. After being at Evoke for 8 weeks, he is going to a working ranch. How do I let go and have expectations that he will eventually accept his new environment and succeed in his new continued growth that he learned from Evoke? The rough answer is you don't have any guarantees. He might not respond. If he has to prove his independence of you by not getting it, he just might do that. So you do, as a parent, the right thing, for lack of a better word. You do the right thing and then you let go of the outcome. You don't get to win, you get to choose how to lose. And you're going to lose by choosing to do something that you think could be very beneficial for him. So you don't get guarantees. And how do you let go of expectations? I guess you just face the facts that you can't control it, that there's no silver bullet, no magic trick to getting him to think, feel, or respond the way that you want him. Fascinating and interesting to share with you. As you let go of the expectation, you give him the best environment, the best context, the best chance at actually accepting it. So by letting go, you contribute to him going exactly where you want him to, but no guarantees. Someone says, can you provide some advice on how to let go of an outcome where the outcome could be the death of your child? Fair question. That, of course, is the extreme. I guess what I would say is this. I've seen parents do amazing work and they've lost a child. I've seen parents do very little work and they lost their child. I've seen parents kick their child out of their home because of repeated addiction and relapses and lying and stealing and aggression, and they've lost the child. And I've seen parents let the child back in over and over and over again. The parents who have lost children, and I've worked with some of them over the years, have said to me that the thing that gave them solace is that they did the best that they could. It's also why I don't think myself. I'll tell you this last story with this last question. and maybe this will best answer it. I was called in to give a presentation on codependency. And as I was going through my lecture and teaching to a group of psychologists and some educational consultants were present, somebody raised their hand and said to me, Brad, how can you give advice to a parent to, for example, kick their child out of the home when the possible result could be death? And I said, I must have misspoke or you misunderstood me, because I would never tell a mother or father to kick a child out of the home. That's far too important and personal decision. What I would do is try to help them to heal their codependency so they could make the choice. So the parents who have been through this, who have faced the worst possible circumstances that a human can face, which is losing a child, could be argued that's the worst possible thing you can face. They've made peace out of it because they did the best that they could, and they made their decision. And ultimately, it's true. You can't stop your child. You can't. All you can do is try to do this work the best you can. So that's my answer to that question. All right, folks, the next broadcast will be next Tuesday, July 28th, and I'm going to be speaking about trauma responses and staying calm. Trauma responses and staying calm. Next Tuesday, July 28th. And I think the time that I set for that was 7 p.m. Mountain Time. I didn't put it on the slide here, but 7 p.m. Mountain Time. As usual, thank you for attending. Thanks for your questions for and in behalf of your children. Thanks for being willing to do this work. Make this a practice in your life. It, of course, will benefit you, and the ripple effects for them are absolutely wonderful. So thank you. Have a good evening. I hope this was helpful. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.